Palace of Versailles began as a hunting lodge constructed under Louis VIII in 1623 and 1624. After a plot to overthrow him took place while he was at the lodge, Louis VIII decided to turn it into a chateau. The palace was next worked on by Louis XIV in the 1660s and 70s, when he had it embellished and enlarged. He also had the gardens redone in a more extravagant manner and even constructed a zoo. As the king spent more time in Versailles, more of the government had to be able to stay there with him. So between 1678 and 1715, 2 wings were constructed and the palace was proclaimed as the king's principal residence. After Louis XIV died in 1715, Louis XV became king. Under his rule, not as much was done to the palace. He had the main building connected to the chapel and had a theater constructed. Louis XVI was the next to rule, but because of events at the time, France had little money to spend on the palace. Some changes were made to the apartments. During the French Revolution, the palace was essentially taken from the king, and over the course of about a year, its contents were either relocated to museums or auctioned off by the new French government. The palace was mostly left alone until 1830, when Louis Philippe became king, and in 1833 he began turning it into a museum. Through the rest of the 1800s, the palace was used for a few ceremonial events, such as the Royal Opera of Versailles and the establishment of the German Empire. During the 1900s, the palace became a tourist attraction, restoration efforts were started, and it became solely a museum and ceremonial location. But perhaps the most significant moment in its history came in 1919 with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First World War. The palace was also heavily damaged by a terrorist attack in 1978. In the 2000s, a series of extensive restoration efforts have been started in various parts of the palace. Some have been completed and others are currently ongoing.
In 1661, Louis XIV entrusted André Lenorte with the creation and renovation of the Gardens of Versailles, which he considered just as important as the palace. Work on the gardens was started at the same time as the work on the palace and lasted for 40 or so years. Each project was reviewed by the king himself, who was keen to see every detail. Creating the gardens was a monumental task. Large amounts of soil had to be shifted to level the ground. Trees were brought in from different regions of France, and thousands of men took part in this immense project. Following damage caused by a series of storms in the late 20th century, including one in December 1999, which was the most devastating, the garden has been fully replanted and now boasts a fresh, youthful appearance similar to how it would have looked to Louis XIV. Under the reign of Louis XIV, the Gardens of Versailles contained 15 groves. Contrasting with the strict regularity of the general layout of the gardens, they had a variety of decor and shapes and never failed to surprise visitors with their diversity. Some of the groves deteriorated rapidly as they were costly and difficult to maintain, and disappeared in the 18th century. Apollo's baths were converted to the Anglo-Chinese style that was very much in vogue during the reign of Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette. The Apollo Baths was created between 1670 and 1673 on the request of Madame de Montespan. The original one no longer exists since Louis XIV had the garden redecorated in 1778 by Hubert Robert. The style we see known is a mix of English and Chinese influences. The 3 groups of statues have given the construction its name since they were all depictions of Apollo in different scenarios. The statues were originally built for the Thetis Grotto, but when this was demolished, it was moved to different parts of the garden before ending at the Apollo Baths. The grotto that surrounds the statues has been exposed to wind and weather, which has left its mark in the beige marble.
The architectural style of the Palace of Versailles is French Baroque architecture. The Baroque is a highly ornate and extravagant style of architecture, music, dance, painting, sculpture, and other arts that flourished in Europe from the early 17th century until the 1740s. The Genetic scale of Versailles exemplifies the architectural theme of creation by division, a series of simple repetitions rhythmically marked up by the repetitions of the large windows, which expresses the fundamental values of Baroque art. Some reception rooms, such as the Salon of Hercules, were decorated with mural painting, much of it by Lee Brown, who was influenced by the Italian tradition of architectural Baroque painting.
What is considered to be the most famous room in the palace is the Hall of Mirrors. Construction began in 1678 and ended in 1684. It was built between the king's apartments to the north and the queen's to the south. The whole length of the 240-foot-long gallery pays tribute to the political, economic, and artistic success of France. Political success are expressed through 30 painted compositions on the arched ceiling. They depicted the history of Louis XIV during the first 18 years of his reign, from 1661 to the peace treaties of Nijmegen. The number and size of the 357 mirrors decorating the 17 arches demonstrated the economic prosperity since, at the time, they were considered a luxury. The artistic success is shown by the red marble used for the rectangular columns with capitals of gilded bronze. This was referred to as the French style, the design that includes national emblems, and the fleur-de-lis style. The Hall of Mirrors also served as a place for meetings, ceremonies, royal weddings, or diplomatic receptions. As mentioned before, it was also here where the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, ending the First World War.